Okay, Liz.
My name's Hannah Mitchell.
My name's Adam Wallen,
Our topic is over nature versus nurture.
and we're open for questions.
Why don't you guys start by just defining what we're talking about when you say nature versus nurture?
Okay, so the definition of nature is what we think of as a pre-wiring and is influenced by genetic inheritance and other biological factors. So that's basically like what you're made of like why your hair color is a certain color, while your eyes is a certain color. And for nurture, it's generally taken as the influence of external factors after conception, the product of exposure, experience, and learning of an individual. So it's basically like how you are raised and what impacts you as you're being raised. So it's not saying like your parents raise you or whoever is raising you at that time. And it's basically like everything. It's basically how it goes.
I noticed in your introductory paragraph that you gave us that you've limited your discussion to not just nature versus nurture in general, but for the most part to criminal behavior. Can you tell me why you did that?
I personally think that they're an interesting subject to study, especially because I want to go into forensic psychology. So I thought we broadened it a little bit, but it's mainly criminal behavior because we kind of, we just need to know more about it, so maybe we could stop it. We didn't mention that in our paragraph because we didn't think of ways to stop it. But if you study them enough, we can figure out how to help.
But is the topic relevant to other areas, not just criminal behavior?
Yes, we went over a little bit of the female and male mind. We have a small topic on Sigmund Freud, twins, and like abusive parent behavior.
I won't ask you about anything other than that. I was just wanting to know if you were aware that it applies to more than just criminal
It's
behavior.
a very broad topic, so we had to down it a little bit.
Do you feel like there's some sort of bias involved by only focusing on criminal behavior and things like that?
I would say maybe a little bit of bias because we're both interested in criminals, in the criminal aspect of it, but we try not to bias it because we did kind of broaden it a little bit.
You know, like what she said, we both like kind of want to go into that field of study. Like, especially me, like I've always had like kind of an interest for this, and it kind of with the nature and nurture, it shows like more in depth like why these criminals are wired the certain way they are, and how it influence them or their genes influence them to go into what we know.
So can you tell me some general conclusions that you've drawn after your research?
I would say it's 50%. There shouldn't be an argument over nature versus nurture anymore because it's 50% of nature and nurture. Because we're wired by our genetics to act a certain way. We're each have a different appearance and personality traits. And our personality traits or appearance can affect outside experiences towards us because people will react to us by our appearances or how we act. And also there's the outside experiences for nurture that it's like abusive, bullying, maybe some kindness that can affect how you see other people and stuff like that.
So who are the experts that you look to sort of make those conclusions?
We were mainly on Psychology Today, and we studied specifically murderbiography.com. It pretty much goes through their whole background life.
For like the free will, we did a person by the name of Dr. Alan Clemental, and he had like a whole paragraph, and we were making sure that it was set in stone, like he was studying what he studied for that.
So did you look at any biologists or any geneticists or anything from sort of psychology? I think would apply more to your environmental influences, but any geneticists, biologists, anything that would look at sort of your biological makeup.
We went over Dr. David Allen, MD, because he went over the genetics of some siblings, but he also went into the psychology aspect. And then we also did a little bit on the nature of sin, and his name is Greg Boyd. He's kind of like a philosopher of biblical study.
And we also do have like the history of where nature came from. So like the person who started this whole argument was Sir Francis Galton in 1869, but he wasn't really linked to it, but that's like the main person that they try to focus on that debate. And we also have John Watson, who had a similar perspective of him, so it's like a lot more.
And David, he was working in the field of criminology, is that correct?
Yes.
What did you make the statement earlier that it's 50-50 nature nurture? Did I hear that? Okay, so that's from all of your research, that's your belief, or that's what you read?
That's our belief, because it's very unclear, it's not an exact science, and no one knows, because the studies are still going on. You can't be for sure that people act a certain way just by genetics, because there's the outside factors that affect us as well.
Okay, so if I take that as true, let's talk about the 50% that is nature. What are the things in nature that are, sorry, let me switch that. Nurture. The words sound a lot alike. Let's go with nurture. What are the things that primarily influence that 50% that's nurture? Tell me about the different aspects of upbringing, social interactions, those sorts of things. You mentioned bullying earlier, I think. What are some of the main causes to influence that nurture side, either for the positive or for the negative?
I would say mainly your social interactions. I mean, we went over, like when we researched some of the killers and maybe school shooters in history, a lot of them were bullied. Some of them could have a good upbringing, but it's mainly the bullying, and an outside factor could be someone named Gacy. Wayne Gacy? I think we kind of know him. I could go in more depth about him later, but he fell off a swing and he had a blood clot for 6 or 7 years before they noticed. I would say that is also an outside factor of nurture, because no one was watching him and they didn't take enough care of him. So
You're saying healthcare could be a factor.
yeah, healthcare could be a factor.
Looking at his case in particular though, you say you're characterizing that as nurture, but there were some biological things that changed in his mind.
Yeah, that's why it's 50-50.
Okay.
So I was going over the nurture side of it. The parental abuse or parental love, if you have 2 siblings, the oldest is going to be treated differently from the youngest, or if you have 3 siblings, there's always the little one who's a little bit forgotten, the youngest one who's raised kind of like a princess because they're the youngest, and the older one who's supposed to be the role model in law.
It just like depends on like the sibling. Like each sibling would like get treated differently at that point in time. Now some siblings like they end up good and bad, but like some people come out of abusive homes and they are perfectly fine, but they might not have gotten the same treatment as like their other sibling with their abusive father or mother. They could have been treated differently for that.
So if you think, oh, I'm sorry, keep going.
If you were gonna answer the question, what about serial killers? Are they born or made? Which way would you fall though? You can't be 50-50 here. Which way are you gonna answer that question?
I would say they were made.
Why is that?
I could list off, but I'll just give do you want me to list it off? Or, okay. I'm gonna say they're made because most of them that I've read about and researched about and know about in general, they usually come from abusive homes, or people bully them, or it's outside factors such as people who affect them personally, physically. Yeah.
What
So no,
about you, Beth?
I would also say the same thing. There's more like nurture killers than nature killers. Now, you could, for like nature killers, they have like a disease, and some of those diseases can be treated with medicine. That's why there's not as many like cases with them. But for nurture killers, they see that as if they're raised in an abusive home, like we said earlier, they think that it's okay that they can live their life like that, or if they have an abusive mom, or they see like their mom as like a figure to them, and their mom like suddenly dies by like their father, they would target out single moms, and that's like why you have some kidnappings of like single moms, because they would see that as their mom and they want them to be treated the same way.
You mentioned some medical conditions that might impact people to be murderers. Sorry about that. And again, can you tell me some of those medical conditions that may be present in serial killers? And we mentioned the blood clot, which I think is more of a medical situation, but what about inherent diseases or?
The son of Sam, David Berkowitz, he had schizophrenia and it wasn't treated properly, so he went on a killing spree.
There's also like
Schizophrenia?
Huntington's disease, and it's where you have a defective gene. Now, usually, like defective genes, they don't produce more protein as you go on, but this gene, it does produce a defective protein, which will produce a defective gene. And this will have, they will have trouble with apathy, so they won't have the same emotion, like they won't sense our emotions as much as like what me and you would. And they would have like trouble initiating like actions with each other. And they will like feel and act differently because we are made up differently, and that's why certain people act the way they do.
What was that disease called?
Huntington's disease.
Huntington's disease?
Yes.
So, let me take that a step further then. Okay, so if we think this Huntington's disease is producing this protein, which could lead to serial killer tendencies or criminal tendencies in general, what should we do if we detect that somebody has this disease? Should we look to incarcerate them? Should we maybe put them in some sort of a treatment facility? What should we do with them? Because if we can identify it and we think it leads to some criminal activity, shouldn't we act on that?
Doesn't always lead to criminal activity because of the nurture aspect.
Aha, well played.
And most of them, if you do have a Huntington's disease, most of them do die by their late 40s.
Talk a little bit more about those. So, some of the serial killers and some of the criminals that you guys have studied. What is the general makeup of their socioeconomic background? Do we have any trends there?
Poor.
Really?
Yes, most of them are poor. So, let's say Ted Bundy.
Okay.
He was born out of wedlock, and so his grandparents raised him, and he thought his mother was his sister, and they lived in an old, dilapidated type of house. And then there's Arthur Shawcross. He lived with his aunt and like 5 other siblings, and there was a financial struggle there. Not all of them are born in a bad economic situation, though.
Do you study the Menendez brothers at all?
Could you
Anything like
possibly give an example of what they did? I might have heard about them.
Coach, do you want to?
They're just very, very wealthy.
Very
Sure,
wealthy.
couple- There was
And
2
a-
brothers that killed their parents in
Yes.
California. They've been in jail. There've actually been some television programs about them.
Documentaries on it.
Very
Wild.
interesting for your case because you've got 2 brothers who acted together. So if you go, okay, well, it's nature, is it nurture? I don't know, because they did the same thing at the same time, killing their parents. It came from a very socioeconomically, a very high socioeconomic state to do this, and then it may go against some of the things that you guys found there. So I would encourage you to.
Do you want to respond? Okay, so that's when codependence takes place, where it's also involves genetics and outside experiences. So there's always a dominant and a less dominant role. One of the brothers could play the dominant role and kind of possess the younger or other brother to take part in the action of killing their parents.
Does the research that you've done suggest that if I'm born this way or I was raised this way, I don't have to take responsibility for my actions? It's always going to be someone else's fault or not anything I can do anything about?
That's like where probably like free will would come into play, honestly. And it's just how, for me, it would be like how you were raised. That would like show like I don't care like really what I do. And it's honestly how you were raised again by like, if I see a certain way and like certain people act that way, I think that it's okay. But I would assume all of us have raised in a good home. And you would say that like on TV, like the school shootings and all that, we don't see like that as a good thing. We see that as a bad thing. So it just depends on how you were raised almost.
But I'm wondering what people might do with the information in terms of punishments that might come from behavior. So, I mean, should we say, oh, this poor person, lived in a shack with his aunt and 6 other siblings, had a very difficult background, didn't have the same privileges as other people, so of course he's going to turn out bad. We can't hold him accountable for that. It's not his fault.
As Abby said, that does take account into free will. And it's pretty much, we studied a free will paper by Dr. Alan Blumenthal, and he's a psychologist, and he pretty much said that we have free will, but we don't have free will because of our genetics and the people around us that influence the ways that make us not as free as we'd hope to be. Despite the influence of genetic and environmental factors, we limit the scope of free will. And if you read more into his paper, he talks about how people have a personal identity. And our personal identity, we can make our greed dissipate, or our kindness get better, our trustworthiness to other people get better, or it can get worse by experiences. But we can't personally change our identity. You can be held accountable for it, because most people that do that, they do know that they're doing wrong, but they always find an excuse for it to block it out. So they do deserve a punishment.
Did your research show a pattern for serial killers on whether they have a high intelligence level or a low intelligence level? And we're not talking about grades made, I'm just saying intelligence, IQ measurements.
I mean, like, it would vary, almost like some serial killers, they do think out of their plans, and that's probably like the worst of them. But honestly, they would probably all like have low intelligence, in my opinion.
Well, it's really not an opinion, but I mean, I was just asking, did your data or your research show one way or the other?
A lot of the nurtured ones, I would say, it doesn't give an exact number. Half of them have low intelligence, the other half have high intelligence. And usually when you go into more the psychopathic aspect, where they become narcissistic and think they're higher above the totem pole of everyone else, they think out their plans methodically, and they don't think they'll get caught. So it's still a 50-50 chance, because the science of nature versus nurture is not exact, and we studied this to try to figure out more about it.
So is it narcissism, is that nature or nurture?
Narcissism, it can be both. I would say psychopathy is actually genetics,
Okay.
so that would go for the nature side.
How many of the criminals that you studied, they weren't exclusively serial killers, were they? Mostly?
We did do
I apologize, I came in late, you may have already explained that.
We did do school shootings. I can probably mention some other people who are narcissistic who are criminals.
I was gonna say, just shooting from the hip of who you studied, what percentage over under would you say that you felt narcissism played a role in their act? Was it a high percentage, a low percentage?
I would say a high percentage, because we did go a little bit, I did outside, I don't have any papers for it, but I did the cults, like Jonestown, and you have to be very charismatic and narcissistic to do that type of thing. So it's a high percentage.
High percentage.
So if it is 50-50, if there's always the answer, and we're still gonna hold these people accountable, why bother looking into it anyway? What's the purpose of researching into this if the answer is, well, it's half and half, and we're not gonna let them off easier, they're still gonna have to pay a penalty? Why do we even look at the issue?
I mean, for me, it's just like interesting to see like how these serial killers, they come from like different backgrounds, and they all like still do like the same, like almost like the same exact crimes. But it's like almost educational a little bit in a sense, because you can come from different backgrounds, but you still, it's nature or nurture. And this topic is like, it's still debatable, and it will always probably will be debatable subject, because it is 50-50. But I would say it is, you need to research this topic, because if we just forget about it, then it would just not work almost in a sense.
Well, I guess that's what I'm curious, I mean, we can all be curious and wanna know things, but, I mean, if it's all, there's nothing that we're gonna do with it, then isn't it just sort of, it's a hobby, I'm just curious, I'm gonna look into it, but I'm not really gonna do anything about it.
By researching it, we can help to try to focus in and notice the signs Like, maybe we could have more psychologists or counselors in schools to help these kids, and if they don't go to school, we could